I'll spite.
So, have you ever found yourself in this exact situation? You're sitting in a really high stakes meeting, or maybe you're just having a deep conversation over dinner.
Right, something where you really want to make an impact.
Exactly. And suddenly, this idea just crystallizes in your mind. Like in your head, the concept is, it's nothing short of brilliant.
The logic is completely flawless.
Flawless. The steps are clear, the conclusion is undeniably perfect, but then the moment you open your mouth to actually share it, the translation from your brain to your vocal cords just completely breaks down.
It's the worst feeling. The words come out all tangled. Hesitate, you backtrack.
Yeah, and within seconds, this world-changing idea just sounds, well, fragile, unconvincing, and frankly, kind of confusing.
It really is a deeply visceral frustration. You can actually watch the listener's body language shift in real time.
Oh, absolutely.
Their eyes lose focus, or they might subtly check their watch, or they just give you that polite non-committal nod.
The nod of death, yes.
Yeah.
You've completely lost them.
You have. And the truly tragic part is that the failure had nothing to do with the actual quality of your idea.
Right, the concept is totally sound.
Exactly. The delivery mechanism simply collapsed. It's, to use a mechanical comparison, it's like you're revving this incredible high-performance engine, but the transmission is just completely disconnected from the wheels.
So all that raw power basically goes nowhere. It just burns out in the engine.
Yes, exactly.
Well, if you are listening to us right now and nodding along, please recognize that you are in very good company. This is a completely universal human experience.
It happens to everyone.
It really does. So today, our singular mission during our time together is to rebuild that transmission. We are dedicating this discussion to really mastering artful persuasion and the psychology of personal impact.
Think of this as a highly focused masterclass. We're going to decode how to actually engineer the structure of your thoughts.
Right, and how to select vocabulary that carries real psychological weight.
And crucially, how to use the physical instrument of your voice. And in the profound weight of silence, honestly, to influence the people around you.
Absolutely. And the environment we are creating today is designed specifically for you, the listener, who is really pushing toward advanced communication.
Yeah, if you are operating at or aiming for that B2 or C1 level of English fluency, this discussion is totally calibrated for your growth.
We'll be exploring some fairly high-level cognitive and linguistic techniques, but our delivery will be methodical.
Right, we're going to maintain a comfortable, intentional pace. The vocabulary will be elevated, sure, but more importantly, we're going to carve out actual moments of silence during our conversation.
We really want to give you the cognitive space to process the ideas, visualize the concepts, and actually practice speaking aloud.
Because this isn't just passive listening. This is meant to be an active thought experiment.
Passive consumption rarely builds new neural pathways, right? The physical act of speaking, the muscle memory of forming advanced phonetic structures.
That's what transforms theoretical knowledge into an automatic reflex.
Exactly. So let's initiate that process right now. I want you to take a slow, deliberate breath.
Let's breathe in.
And as you exhale, I want you to isolate one specific communication habit that causes you friction.
Maybe your speaking rate accelerates wildly when your adrenaline spikes.
Or maybe your mind goes completely blank and you drop crucial vocabulary under pressure. Or your sentences get cluttered with filler words.
Whatever it is, identify it.
We're going to wait for a few seconds. I want you to speak that one habit out loud to us right now in the room with you. Go ahead.
We're listening.
Okay, so just acknowledging that friction point is the first critical step.
Absolutely. Throughout our time today, we're going to construct the exact tools you need to resolve that specific habit.
To begin, though, we really have to address the most fundamental layer of persuasion. Because before you can shift someone's paradigm or win their agreement,
They have to actually understand what you're saying. They have to effortlessly process the architecture of your argument.
the word effortlessly is definitely the key operator there.
It is. The human brain is basically a predictive machine. When we listen to someone speak, we're constantly trying to anticipate where the sentence is going next.
Right, we're always guessing the end of the thought.
Exactly. So when a speaker lacks structural architecture, the listener's brain has to work incredibly hard to piece the logic together.
And that creates massive cognitive fatigue.
Huge fatigue. To prevent that, we have to rely on the foundational elements of fluent speech, which are discourse markers.
Let's strip away the academic terminology for a second. When we talk about discourse markers, we're essentially just talking about navigation, right?
Right. Words like however, furthermore, consequently, or on the contrary.
They are the load-bearing beams that keep the whole structure from collapsing.
They are the linguistic signals that manage the listener's expectations. If you actually look at the neuroscience of listening,
Oh, this is fascinating.
when a speaker introduces a sudden pivot in logic without a marker, the listener experiences what's called a minor prediction error. Their brain literally spikes in confusion.
Wow. So discourse markers smooth out those neurological spikes?
Exactly, they act as a buffer.
I frequently think of them as the turn signals on a highway.
Oh, yeah.
If I'm driving 70 miles an hour and the car in front of me violently swerves into the left lane without an indicator,
You have to slam on your brakes.
it's jarring and it's dangerous. In a conversation, if you're driving your argument forward and suddenly introduce a contradictory idea,
Without deploying a turn signal like nevertheless or on the other hand,
right, the listener basically crashes into your next point. They totally lose their orientation.
the turn signal analogy is perfect because it highlights the preventative nature of these words. The listener requires those cues to prepare their mind for a shift in direction.
But there is a trap here, isn't there?
Yeah.
The trap that many advanced language learners fall into is treating these markers like a simple checklist.
Yes. They memorize isolated words and then just deploy them mechanically.
And the result is this really robotic cadence. You hear people presenting in boardrooms saying, first, our revenue is down. Furthermore, our costs are up. In conclusion, we have a problem.
It feels completely hollow.
Right. The words are technically correct, but the execution totally lacks fluidity. So how do we move beyond the mechanical checklist?
The evolution involves learning these markers not as isolated vocabulary words, but as conceptual frames.
Conceptual frames. Tell me more about that.
A frame is an entire phrase that inherently balances multiple complex ideas at once. Instead of simply relying on the word but to show contrast, a sophisticated speaker utilizes a frame.
Like what?
Like, while it is true that X, nevertheless Y, this structure communicates to the listener that you have the intellectual capacity to hold two competing realities in your mind simultaneously.
It demonstrates nuance. You aren't just ignoring the opposing viewpoint. You are actively engaging with it and still driving your point home.
Exactly. It shows you've thought about the big picture.
Let's run a simulation with you, the listener. We will use a highly effective B2 level frame. The structure uses the word admittedly to concede a difficulty.
Followed by, however, to pivot toward the strategic advantage.
Right. I'm going to model the phrase, and then I want you to vocalize it wherever you are. Here is the frame. Admittedly, there are challenges. However, the benefits are clear.
Take a moment and speak that aloud.
Go ahead.
The psychological impact of deploying a frame like that is just immediate. It significantly elevates your perceived authority.
Because by admitting the challenge up front, you basically neutralize the listener's urge to argue with you.
Precisely. You have already acknowledged their potential objection, which clears the path for your conclusion.
So we have established our navigational signals. But a handful of signals isn't enough to build the entire road.
No, it's not.
When you are asked a complex question, especially in a high-stakes environment, relying purely on instinct often just leads to rambling. You really need a macro structure.
You need a mental blueprint. When adrenaline floods your system during a difficult question, your executive function, the logical part of your brain, can temporarily compromise.
It just shuts down.
Basically, yeah. Having an internalized blueprint gives your brain a default pathway. And the most robust, widely applicable pathway is the PEAL framework. P-E-E-L.
Let's dissect the architecture of PEAL. What does it stand for?
The acronym stands for point, example, explanation, and link. The sequence is vital here.
Okay, so walk us through the sequence.
You initiate by stating your main point with absolute clarity. Next, you immediately ground that abstract point in reality with a concrete example.
Okay, point, then example.
Then the third step is the explanation, where you unpack the mechanics of exactly why that example validates your point. Finally, you link the entire thought back to the core question, or the broader strategic goal.
The necessity of that second step, the example, is really fascinating to me. Abstract points are incredibly difficult for the human brain to hold on to.
They just float away.
Yeah, if I say efficiency is good, that is just an abstract concept floating in the ether. But the moment I provide a physical example, the listener's brain can visualize it.
Let's actually demonstrate the full framework in action.
Okay.
Imagine a scenario where I am asked a broad philosophical question. What is the true value of adopting a daily reading habit?
Without a blueprint, I might offer a really chaotic answer like, well, Reading makes you smarter, you learn new vocabulary, and it's better than watching television, which ruins your eyes.
Right, it totally lacks impact.
Now listen to the contrast when I process that exact same question through the Peel framework. Notice the distinct phases of point, example, explanation, and link.
Pay close attention here.
The most profound benefit of a daily reading habit is the restoration of your cognitive focus. For instance, when I commit to reading a physical book for just 20 minutes every morning, I notice a severe drop in my urge to check my phone throughout the afternoon. The mechanism behind this is that reading a long-form text forces your neural pathways to sustain attention on a single narrative, which actively rebuilds your attention span. Ultimately, this means that reading isn't just a leisure activity. It is a foundational practice for sustaining deep work in a highly distracted world.
That is perfect.
Yeah.
Let's analyze the structural integrity of that response. Your initial point was an assertion about cognitive focus.
Right.
Then you anchored it with a personal example of a 20-minute morning routine. Your explanation brought in the mechanics of neural pathways and sustained attention.
And then my link pulled the listener out of the detail.
Yes, it connected the habit to the macro-level benefit of professional deep work. The listener never have to guess why you are sharing a detail. The framework does the heavy lifting.
And honestly, the internal experience of using that framework is just as profound as the external impact. When I hold those 4 steps in my mind, the anxiety of speaking basically evaporates.
Because you know your destination.
Exactly. I know my final destination before I even finish my first sentence. But, the Peel framework seems really optimized for answering a direct question or stating a belief.
It is.
What happens when the environment demands that we navigate a complex dilemma, like being asked to choose between 2 highly flawed options?
Right. Dilemmas require a totally different structural approach. Because in that scenario, the listener isn't just looking for your answer. They are evaluating your judgment.
They need to see the mechanism of your critical thinking.
Precisely. And for this, we deploy the PCR framework. Pros, cons, and recommendation.
The psychology of the PCR framework is brilliant because it's deeply rooted in building trust. If someone asks my opinion on a controversial company policy and I immediately state my final recommendation,
The people who disagree with you will instantly put their defenses up.
immediately, they stop listening to my logic because they are busy formulating their counterargument in their head.
But by starting with the pros, you validate the positive aspects of the situation. Then, by moving to the cons, you demonstrate a sober awareness of the risks.
You are effectively walking the listener through your own analytical process.
Let's imagine a scenario where you're asked if your organization should permanently adopt remote work or force a return to the office.
Oh, wow. A highly emotional topic for a lot of people.
Exactly the kind of environment where PCR is basically mandatory. You begin with the pros. The remote model provides undeniable flexibility and reclaims thousands of hours previously lost to commuting.
Then you smoothly transition to the cons.
Right. Conversely, a strictly remote environment degrades the spontaneous, cross-departmental interactions that often drive our most innovative ideas.
So, having laid out both realities completely and partially, the audience is primed for the recommendation.
Yes, they are ready to hear it.
Given those competing factors, I recommend implementing a structured hybrid model, mandating 2 specific days in the office dedicated entirely to collaborative sessions, while preserving the rest of the week for deep, isolated work.
Perfect. You presented yourself not as an ideologue pushing an agenda, but as a rational arbiter of facts.
Which is incredibly persuasive.
Yeah.
Now, there is one final structural blueprint that is critical for anyone navigating high-stakes environments, right? Like a major project debrief or a really difficult job interview.
Yes, the acronym for this one is PODR. Problem, options, decision, result.
Problem, options, decision, result. That almost sounds like the structure of a classic narrative arc.
It basically is. You are essentially turning a business crisis into a hero's journey.
I love that.
The human brain is hardwired for storytelling, and PODR leverages that hardwiring to frame you as a highly competent protagonist. When asked about a failure or a crisis, inexperienced communicators tend to focus entirely on the emotional chaos of the problem.
They just vent.
Yeah, they get stuck in the problem. PODR forces the narrative forward into resolution.
Let's visualize how this operates. The interviewer asks, describe a moment when a major project you managed went completely off the rails. The natural instinct is to get defensive or maybe blame others.
But instead, you deploy PODR. You state the problem objectively. 72 hours before our global software launch, we discovered a catastrophic security vulnerability in the user database.
Notice the lack of emotion there, just the facts. Then we move to the options.
We were faced with two paths: proceed with the launch and risk a massive data breach, or delay the launch by 2 weeks, which would result in severe financial penalties and public embarrassment.
Then the decision. I made the call to halt the launch immediately, prioritizing long-term user trust over short-term financial metrics.
And finally, the result. While we absorbed a temporary hit to our quarterly revenue, the transparency we demonstrated actually increased our customer retention rate by 12% over the following year.
That is so powerful. A listener is not focused on the fact that you had a crisis. They are entirely focused on your capacity to remain analytical under extreme pressure.
Exactly. The structure literally dictates their perception of your competence.
These structures, PEAL, PCR, PODR, they are incredible tools. But we really need to address the reality of speaking, particularly when operating in a second or third language.
Of course.
You can have the PODR framework perfectly visualized in your mind. You are halfway through a brilliant sentence, and suddenly the specific word you need just vanishes. Complete cognitive blank. What is the protocol for that exact moment?
Honestly, the protocol there is the difference between intermediate and advanced fluency. An intermediate speaker experiences that blank space as a crisis.
They freeze.
They freeze, they apologize profusely, or they visibly panic, which then transfers their anxiety to the listener.
Right. But a B2 or C1 speaker understands that forgetting a word is simply a logistical delay. They do not freeze, they repair.
Repairing the sentence. It requires a fundamental shift in mindset, viewing the missing word not as a solid wall, but as a detour.
The technique relies on specific paraphrasing phrases, right?
Yes, phrases that serve a dual purpose. First, they buy your brain a few extra seconds of processing time. Second, they signal to the listener that you are intentionally rephrasing for clarity rather than stumbling in confusion.
So we utilize phrases like, what I mean is, to put it another way, or let me reframe that.
Exactly.
If I am in a budget meeting and my brain just drops the word inflation, I don't stop and stare at the ceiling. I smoothly say, we have to adjust our projections based on the current. Let me reframe that. We must account for the rapid increase in the cost of goods across the market.
And just like that, you describe the concept without needing the specific noun, and the momentum of the speech never faltered.
The listener rarely even registers that a word was forgotten. They simply perceive a speaker who's dedicated to making their point clear.
Let's invite you to run a real-time repair simulation. Imagine you're explaining your daily journey to the office, but the word commute completely disappears from your memory.
How would you deploy a repair phrase, perhaps what I mean is, to navigate around the missing word and describe the action of traveling to work? Take a few seconds and speak your repair out loud.
Try it now.
Okay, if your response sounded something like, I am exhausted by my daily. What I mean is, the hour-long train ride into the city drains my energy. You have successfully mastered the repair mechanism.
You kept the bridge of communication totally intact.
So we have established a robust physical architecture for our speech. We possess discourse markers for navigation, frameworks for macro structure, and repair phrases for maintaining momentum. The structural foundation is secure.
However, a perfectly structured argument will still fail if it does not align with the psychological state of the person receiving it.
This transition brings us to the core of our exploration today. We are moving from the mechanics of speech to the deep psychology of influence. How does the human brain actually process persuasion?
Decades of cognitive psychology have revealed that the brain basically operates on two entirely distinct processing tracks when evaluating a persuasive message.
What are they?
These are commonly referred to as the thoughtful route and the mindless or automatic route of persuasion.
The thoughtful route and the mindless route. The distinction implies a difference in the amount of cognitive energy being expended rightly. Let's analyze the thoughtful route first.
The thoughtful route is highly analytical. When a listener is utilizing this pathway, they are evaluating the intrinsic logic of your argument. They are scrutinizing the data, demanding empirical evidence, and testing your premises.
But activating this route requires specific conditions, doesn't it?
Yes, two specific conditions. The listener must have the motivation to care about the topic and the cognitive capacity to process it at that specific moment.
So if I am presenting a financial audit to a board of directors, they are highly motivated to listen, and they have allocated the mental energy for the meeting. They are securely in the thoughtful route.
Exactly. They want the spreadsheets, the risk analysis, the concrete logic.
But what occurs when the listener lacks that motivation? What if the audience is entirely neutral or preoccupied with their own problems?
When the audience is neutral, relying purely on logic is a strategic error. The thoughtful road is essentially closed.
So how do you open it?
To open it, you must bridge the gap between your objective and their self-interest. You must answer the silent question echoing in their limbic system. How does this impact my survival, my status, or my resources?
You literally have to manufacture the motivation. If I am pitching a new software system to employees who are perfectly happy with the old system, listing the technical specifications will achieve nothing.
Nothing at all.
I have to demonstrate how the new software will eliminate 2 hours of tedious data entry from their Friday afternoons. I connect the logical idea directly to their personal desire for free time.
And only then will they expend the energy to evaluate your logic. But we must confront the reality of the modern environment. Often people are not merely unmotivated, they are cognitively depleted.
Which forces the brain into the second pathway, the mindless or automatic route.
Exactly.
Now, the term mindless persuasion carries some heavy baggage. It evokes imagery of manipulation, coercion, or tricking people into acting against their own interests. We need to dissect this carefully. Why does the brain resort to this automatic pathway?
The automatic pathway is not a flaw. It is an evolutionary survival mechanism. The modern human is subjected to an unfathomable volume of information.
It's overwhelming.
It is. Research suggests the average individual encounters well over 1,000 persuasive messages, advertisements, and requests every single day.
If our prefrontal cortex, the analytical center of the brain, attempted to use the thoughtful route to evaluate the logical merit of every single message, our neural circuitry would overload.
We would be paralyzed by decision fatigue before breakfast.
The cognitive load is simply too immense to process manually.
Precisely why the brain relies on heuristics. Heuristics are mental shortcuts. When cognitive energy is low, the brain searches for peripheral cues, emotional triggers, environmental signals, or social patterns to make rapid automatic decisions without engaging deep logical analysis.
And this is the automatic route of influence.
Yes.
Understanding these shortcuts is paramount. If we know the brain is actively seeking these cues to save energy, what are the most potent triggers we can provide to facilitate that automatic agreement?
Among the myriad of psychological triggers, 2 stand out for their universal efficacy. Conformity, which is deeply tied to social proof, and liking, which is rooted in neural resonance.
Let's examine conformity.
Human beings are apex predators, but our evolutionary success was entirely dependent on group cohesion. Being ostracized from the tribe meant certain death. Therefore, our brains are hardwired to view the behavior of the majority as a proxy for safety and correctness.
If everyone else is running away from the bushes, I don't stop to analyze the bushes, I run.
Exactly. In a modern context, if an idea is presented as the industry standard, or if a product is perceived as massively popular, our brain automatically bypasses logical scrutiny and assumes it must be the optimal choice.
The power of social proof is so profound that it often overrides our own sensory perception. And what is truly fascinating is how this mechanism operates even within individuals who pride themselves on being nonconformists.
The psychological paradox of the rebel highlights this beautifully.
I'm so glad we are touching on this. There is this illusion that highly independent thinkers are immune to the automatic route of conformity. But marketing psychology proves otherwise. Advertisers simply redefine the parameters of the group.
The mechanism remains identical. Only the aesthetic changes. If you wish to influence a demographic that values rebellion, you do not use mainstream social proof. You use niche social proof. You convince them that all the other enlightened rebellious individuals are adopting your idea.
The classic satirical film The Life of Brian encapsulates this paradox perfectly.
Oh, the balcony scene.
Yes. The protagonist stands on a balcony looking down at a massive crowd of followers and desperately tries to dismantle their groupthink. He shouts, "You don't need to follow me. You are all individuals. You are all different."
And the entire crowd, without a hint of irony, chants back in perfect unison.
Yes, we are all individuals.
It is a profound commentary on human nature. We conform even in our attempts to display nonconformity.
Amazing. Now, what about this second primary trigger?
The second trigger for the automatic route is the principle of liking. We are biologically predisposed to agree with, trust, and be influenced by individuals we feel a positive emotional connection toward.
This principle seems incredibly intuitive, almost basic. Of course, we agree with our friends more than our enemies, but the strategic application in a professional, high-stakes environment requires nuance. How do you manufacture that genuine sense of liking with a stakeholder or a client you've only just met?
The architecture of liking is built on 3 pillars: similarity, sincere validation, and cooperative framing. The first pillar, similarity, activates the mirror neuron system.
How does that work?
When we perceive someone as sharing our attributes, whether it's a shared professional background, a mutual hobby, or even similar pacing in speech, our brain categorizes them as in-group. Trust accelerates rapidly.
This is why small talk before a negotiation isn't actually small. Finding out you both grew up in the same region isn't trivial. It is establishing a neural baseline of safety.
Exactly. What about the second pillar, sincere validation?
Right, sincere validation. Human beings have a nearly insatiable psychological hunger for recognition, don't they?
They do. Offering genuine praise or acknowledging someone's specific expertise lowers their defensive barriers. But the key word is genuine. The brain is highly attuned to flattery that carries an ulterior motive. The praise must be rooted in observable reality.
And the third pillar, cooperative framing, is about language. It is shifting the dynamic from a combat scenario to a collaborative puzzle.
Yes.
Instead of framing an issue as my proposal versus your budget constraints, you reframe it. Given the market realities, how can we engineer a solution that achieves both our targets? The pronoun shift from I and you to we physically changes the dynamic in the room.
It creates a team out of thin air. So we have mapped the dual pathways of the brain. The thoughtful route demands rigorous logic, while the automatic route relies on evolutionary shortcuts, like social proof and liking.
Let's solidify this mapping with a brief recall exercise for you, the listener. Take a deep breath. Can you retrieve the specific names of the two distinct psychological routes of persuasion we just analyzed? Take a moment and state them aloud.
Just call them out.
If you identified the thoughtful route and the automatic or mindless route, your retention is excellent. We possess the structural frameworks, and we comprehend the psychological pathways.
Now we arrive at the granular level, the precise vocabulary required to activate these systems. Strategic word choice is the difference between a blunt instrument and a surgical tool.
The first technique in strategic word choice is often really counterintuitive for driven professionals. It is the linguistic tool of hedging.
Yes, hedging.
When most people hear the term hedging, they associate it with weakness, with avoiding commitment. We are taught to speak with absolute certainty. Why would we intentionally soften our language?
Because absolute certainty often triggers the listener's threat response. In advanced communication, particularly when navigating complex problems, expressing an opinion as an infallible, absolute fact, saying, this is definitely the only way forward, or that perspective is completely wrong, signals dogmatism.
It communicates an unwillingness to absorb new information.
Exactly. When you corner someone with absolute language, their ego has no choice but to fight back. They stop evaluating your idea and start defending their intellect.
Hedging acts as a pressure valve for the ego. It introduces a calculated degree of nuance. You soften the edges of your assertion, making it vastly easier for the other person to digest and accept.
Instead of the aggressive, this is the best strategy, a calibrated speaker utilizes a hedge. On balance, I would suggest this strategy offers the highest probability of success.
The phrases are remarkably elegant. On balance, it appears that, to a certain extent, these phrases communicate intellectual humility. Ironically, by admitting a fraction of uncertainty, you project a much higher degree of quiet confidence.
You sound like someone who has rigorously analyzed all the variables, which drastically increases your persuasive power.
Let's test the practical application of this. Imagine a scenario where a colleague presents a logistical plan and you instantly recognize a massive flaw. Your instinct might scream to say, your plan is entirely wrong.
That approach guarantees a conflict.
How could you transform that aggressive reaction into a polite, hedged response using the introductory phrase, from my perspective? Construct the sentence in your mind and speak it aloud.
Well, wait a second.
A masterful response would be, from my perspective, there might be a few additional variables we need to account for. You have firmly established your disagreement, but you preserved their dignity and kept the collaborative pathway open.
While hedging is vital for de-escalation and nuance, there are moments that require language with intense semantic weight. This introduces the concept of power words, or psychological impact terms. The primary adversary here is vague, diluted vocabulary.
This is a pervasive issue, even at the executive level. You listen to a quarterly briefing, and a leader says, we did a lot of good stuff this month. We made things better for the clients, and we got some nice results.
The words stuff, things, good, and nice are empty vessels. They convey zero specific information and carry no emotional resonance. They dilute the speaker's authority.
Vague language suggests a vague mind. To project leadership, a speaker must ruthlessly eliminate those empty vessels and replace them with concrete, authoritative verbs and nouns. The vocabulary must possess momentum.
Let's analyze your example. We got some nice results. The cognitive impact is negligible. An advanced upgrade would be, we engineered a significant breakthrough.
Engineered a breakthrough. The semantic difference is staggering. It implies intentionality, intelligence, and high value.
Similarly, we must upgrade weak verbs like do, make, or fix. You don't fix the schedule, you streamline the timeline. You don't make the process better, you optimize the workflow. You don't add features, you enhance the capability.
These words subconsciously signal competence to the listener's brain. But I embrace the necessity of powerful vocabulary, but I sense a trap here. There is a fine line between utilizing authoritative language and descending into corporate jargon.
Oh, absolutely.
If I populate every sentence with words like synergize, paradigm shift, and optimize, I risk alienating the room. It feels performative, like wearing a tuxedo to a casual dinner on the beach. It creates immense discomfort.
You have identified the trap of pedantry. Pedantry occurs when a speaker utilizes overly complex or obscure language, not to clarify a concept, but to broadcast their own intellect. From a psychological standpoint, pedantry is lethal to persuasion.
Because it triggers resentment.
Resentment is the secondary reaction. The primary reaction is cognitive strain. We discussed how the brain seeks to conserve energy. There is a psychological concept known as the fluency heuristic. It dictates that the brain equates easy-to-process information with truth and reliability.
If your vocabulary is so dense that the listener has to expend immense energy just to decode your sentences, their brain will instinctively reject the underlying message, regardless of its validity.
The goal of advanced vocabulary is to build a bridge of understanding, not a wall of intellectual superiority. However, in highly specialized fields, medicine, engineering, finance, technical terminology is unavoidable. You cannot always replace a precise technical term with a simpler word without losing critical meaning. How do we navigate this?
The solution is a technique called the generous translation. When you are forced to deploy a highly technical or obscure term, you immediately follow it with a clarifying phrase, such as that is, or in other words.
This allows you to maintain the precision of the terminology while instantly removing the cognitive strain for the listener.
Consider a medical professional speaking to a patient's family. If they say, the patient is presenting with acute myocardial infarction, the family is left in a state of terrified confusion.
But if the professional says, the patient is presenting with an acute myocardial infarction, in other words, they are experiencing a severe heart attack, the dynamic changes entirely.
The speaker established their unquestionable expertise by using the clinical term, but demonstrated profound empathy by immediately providing the translation. It is the linguistic equivalent of extending a helping hand.
We have meticulously engineered the architecture of our arguments, mapped the psychological pathways, and selected words with profound semantic weight. Yet all of these elements rely on vocalization.
We now arise at a paradigm shift in our discussion. The most devastatingly effective tool in the arsenal of persuasion is not a word at all. It is the strategic deployment of absolute silence.
Silence.
Even just pausing for a second there, the power of the pause,
Yeah.
the physical tension in the silence is palpable.
The pause is the ultimate differentiator between a competent speaker and a masterful one. It is an incredibly versatile, yet consistently terrifying tool for most individuals.
The terror is real. When you are standing at the head of a conference table, the adrenaline is surging and all eyes are on you. A 2-second pause feels like an agonizing eternity.
The overwhelming biological instinct is to fill the void, to keep the vocal momentum going at all costs, because silence feels like a loss of control.
That instinct is rooted in the body's acute stress response. Adrenaline accelerates your internal clock. Your perception of time warps, making you feel that any silence is a catastrophic failure. Consequently, the mouth accelerates to match the internal anxiety, running far ahead of the brain's capacity to organize thought.
The result is a rambling, disjointed stream of consciousness.
The sentence begins, but you have absolutely no idea what the destination is. You are just hoping to find a logical conclusion before you run out of breath.
A deliberate, muscular pause reverses this destructive sequence. It establishes dominance over the adrenaline. In that fraction of a second of silence, your prefrontal cortex can scan the landscape, organize the logical framework, select the precise vocabulary, and lay the track. The pause allows your mind to actively script your mouth.
We need to anchor this concept with a physical experience. I am going to present a question to you, the listener. The rules of the simulation are strict. Before you formulate your answer out loud, you must close your mouth and enforce a silent, deliberate 3-second pause. Allow your mind to script the sentence before your vocal cords engage.
Here's the prompt.
What is the most significant obstacle you face in mastering advanced English? Enforce the pause. Then speak.
Give it a try.
The internal sensation of that silence is remarkable, isn't it? It transforms a moment of panic into a moment of authority. You give yourself permission to think.
And while a pause is a vital sanctuary for the speaker, its impact on the listener is equally profound. This introduces the concept of audience processing time.
The delta between the speed of speech and the speed of comprehension.
Precisely. Imagine pouring a gallon of water onto a patch of severely parched, dry soil. If you invert the bucket and dump the water instantly, the vast majority of it will pool on the surface and run off. The soil cannot absorb the volume at that velocity.
To saturate the deep roots, you must pour a small amount, pause to let it absorb, and then pour again.
The human brain processes novel information exactly like that dry soil. When you are presenting an idea, you have the advantage of familiarity. You have lived with this concept for days or weeks. The listener is encountering it for the first time.
It requires roughly twice as long for the listener's brain to hear the phrase, decode the vocabulary, evaluate the logic, and formulate a reaction as it takes you to physically speak the words.
If you eliminate the pauses between your core concepts, you're pouring water entirely too fast. You are onto your third point while their brain is still struggling to absorb the first. The persuasion fails not because the idea was poor, but because the cognitive absorption was blocked.
When we fail to tolerate silence, we inevitably attempt to mask our panic by deploying filler words, the crutch words, the endless stream of ums, ahs, likes, and you-knows.
Filler words are the auditory manifestation of insecurity. They severely degrade the perception of your intelligence and conviction. They communicate to the listener that you are unsure of your own footing.
The challenge is that filler words are not a conscious choice. They're deeply ingrained neurological habits. You cannot simply command your brain to stop saying The habit is too deeply entrenched. How do we dismantle this?
You dismantle a physical habit by replacing it with a conflicting physical action. You must train your sensory awareness to detect the exact millisecond a filler word is rising in your throat. When you feel the about to materialize, you execute a mechanical sequence, firmly close your lips, and inhale silently through your nose.
The mechanics of closing the mouth are brilliant. An physically cannot escape a closed mouth.
And the silent nasal inhalation serves multiple physiological purposes. It introduces oxygen to the brain, which lowers cortisol levels, and it forces a natural pause. To the audience, this mechanical replacement does not look like a struggle for vocabulary. It looks like the deliberate, thoughtful silence of an intellectual. Nonsense syllables draw negative attention. Silence draws respect.
Silence also manufactures drama. If we look at the structure of a classical symphony, the composer will often build to a massive, chaotic crescendo, and then, right before the emotional climax of the piece, the entire orchestra drops into total silence. The absence of sound creates a vacuum. Because of that vacuum, the next chord strikes with exponentially more emotional force.
You are utilizing silence to manipulate anticipation. A strategic pause placed immediately prior to a critical revelation forces the audience to mentally lean in. They instinctively wonder, what is coming next? Furthermore, pairing that silence with sustained unblinking eye contact creates a magnetic presence. It communicates that you are not reciting a memorized script, but rather you are synthesizing profound insights in real time, specifically for them.
We have established the necessity of the pause, but we need tactical implementation. Where, structurally, should we be injecting these moments of silence into our speech?
The deployment must be strategic. First, enforce a robust pause whenever you transition between major topics. It acts as a cognitive palate cleanser, signaling the end of one chapter and the beginning of the next. Second, utilize micro-pauses to clarify lists.
Replacing the grammatical comma with an auditory silence.
Exactly. Instead of rushing through, we need to analyze the budget, the timeline, and the personnel, you articulate, we must analyze the budget, the timeline, and the personnel. The items become distinct and memorable. Finally, and most importantly for persuasion, you must pause after delivering a crucial argument. This provides the listener the necessary space to internalize the logic and formulate their questions, which is the cornerstone of active, empathetic listening.
The structural foundation is built, the psychology is mapped, the vocabulary is sharpened, and we have harnessed the dramatic power of silence. We are now entering the final phase of our masterclass, bringing the instrument to life. When we finally break the silence and vocalize our thoughts, How do we manipulate the physical sound of our voice to maximize influence?
The physical tone of your voice is the carrier wave for your message. You can construct a flawless argument using the PODR framework, select the most potent power words, and pause beautifully, but if your vocal tone is incongruent with your intent, the persuasion shatters. The listener's brain is highly attuned to micro variations in pitch and resonance. A master communicator consciously shifts between distinct tonal profiles based on the objective.
Let's analyze the two primary profiles. We will begin with what is often termed the authority tone. In what scenarios is this tone required, and what are its physical characteristics?
The authority tone is deployed when you must project absolute certainty. It is utilized for delivering difficult news, presenting hard empirical data, or issuing a definitive strategic recommendation. Physically, it requires dropping the pitch of your voice toward the lower end of your natural register. You speak from the resonance of your chest cavity, rather than the tightness of your throat. The pace becomes extremely steady, and the articulation of every consonant is sharp and precise.
It evokes the cadence of a veteran news anchor delivering a critical global update. It is deeply grounded and immovable. But authority isn't always the goal. What is the alternative?
The counterpart is the collaborative tone. This is the tone of discovery. You utilize this when brainstorming, navigating a sensitive conflict, or attempting to build immediate rapport. The collaborative tone is inherently warmer. The pitch rests slightly higher in your register, and the cadence is highly melodic, meaning your voice rises and falls with more fluidity. The pace is relaxed, signaling vulnerability, openness, and a genuine desire for partnership.
The contrast is clear. However, I foresee a significant risk with the authority tone. If I drop my pitch and maintain a highly steady, measured pace to present data, I risk crossing the line into a monotone delivery. A monotone voice acts as a neurological sedative. It will put a boardroom to sleep in 3 minutes, regardless of how brilliant the data is. How do we project authority without inducing a coma?
That is a crucial distinction. Authority must never be confused with monotony. The antidote to the monotone trap is deliberate pitch variation. You must identify the most critical word in your sentence and subtly raise your pitch and volume on that specific word.
Provide a demonstration of how that alters the delivery.
If I deliver the sentence flatly, this new protocol will decrease our operational costs. The information is there, but the energy is dead. To inject vitality while maintaining authority, I highlight the core value proposition. This new protocol will substantially decrease our operational costs. By striking that single word, the entire sentence gains architectural texture. Furthermore, highlighting a word forces you to naturally decelerate your pace around it, which naturally enhances your phonetic clarity.
The physical sound of the voice brings the data to life. But as we synthesize everything we have discussed today, we must address the ultimate vehicle for human influence. We established early on that the thoughtful road of persuasion relies on data, logic, and frameworks. But logic only achieves comprehension. To achieve profound persuasion, to move people to act, you must employ narrative. Facts inform, stories persuade.
The human brain is fundamentally a storytelling engine. We organize the chaos of reality into narrative structures. When a listener hears a well-constructed story, their brain activity physically synchronizes with the speaker's brain, a phenomenon known as neural entrainment. However, the corporate world is plagued by individuals telling ineffective stories. The fatal flaw in most professional narratives is the absence of stakes.
Stakes represent the consequences. What is the ultimate risk? What is gained by victory? And what is the devastating cost of failure? A story without stakes is just a chronological recitation of events.
To inject stakes into a professional narrative, you must master the so what reframe. Every time you present a feature, a data point, or a new initiative, you must aggressively interrogate it by asking, so what? What happens to the human beings involved if we fail to implement this? You must connect the abstract business logic to fundamental human desires, the psychological need for security, the desperate desire to reclaim lost time, or the fear of isolation.
Let's run a rapid so what reframe simulation. Suppose I am pitching an enterprise software platform and my core selling point is our architecture includes a 24/7 localized customer support matrix. That is a sterile fact. It informs the thoughtful route, but it completely fails to activate the emotional resonance of the automatic route. How do I transform that sterile fact into a high-stakes narrative?
You transition the listener from an abstract observer to the protagonist of a crisis. You synthesize the tone, the pause, and the stakes. Instead of reciting the feature, you paint the scenario. Visualize this. It is 2:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. You are finalizing the data for the most critical board presentation of your career, and without warning, the entire database locks you out. The panic sets in. But because of our architecture, you are not isolated in that crisis. Within 12 seconds, you are connected to a human engineer who navigates you back to safety.
The physiological response to that narrative is immediate. My cortisol spiked the mention of the database locking, and my oxytocin released at the resolution. You didn't just tell me the software was reliable, you made me physically experience the relief of that reliability. That is the zenith of artful persuasion.
Yeah, it really is.
We are going to provide you, the listener, with one final opportunity to synthesize these elements into a single physical action. I want you to scan your memory for a recent professional or personal obstacle you successfully navigated. You're going to construct one sentence introducing that obstacle, but you must layer the techniques. Employ the warm, melodic, collaborative tone and punctuate the end of the sentence with a massive, suspenseful pause.
Listen to this example. Early last quarter, we realized our entire supply chain was on the verge of collapse.
Formulate your sentence. Apply the tone. Execute the pause. Speak it now.
Go ahead.
If you fully committed to holding that silence, you experienced the raw gravitational pull of masterful communication. You commanded the space entirely.
You really did.
This brings us to the culmination of our exploration. We have dismantled and reconstructed the entire engine of persuasion.
We established the architecture, utilizing discourse markers not as words, but as navigational frames to prevent cognitive friction. We explored the robust structures of Peel, PCR, and PODR to organize chaos into logic.
We mapped the dual pathways of the mind, acknowledging that while the thoughtful route demands rigorous evidence, the automatic route is governed by the evolutionary imperatives of conformity and sincere liking.
We refined our vocabulary, utilizing hedging to bypass the listener's defensive ego, while aggressively replacing vague language with high-impact power words, all while carefully dodging the trust-destroying trap of pedantry through generous translation.
We studied the physics of the pause, allowing our prefrontal cortex to script our words, replacing the anxiety of filler words with the powerful calm of a silent nasal breath.
And ultimately, we brought the instrument to life, modulating between the authority and collaborative tones and framing our objective data within the deeply resonant structure of high-stakes storytelling.
The breadth of this toolkit is immense. For a professional operating in a second language, the sheer volume of techniques can seem overwhelming. The question arises, how does one translate this deep theoretical knowledge into automatic subconscious reflexes?
The solution lies in the 12-week roadmap philosophy. Mastery is not achieved through sporadic, grueling hours of study. Neurological adaptation requires consistent, low-dose repetition. You need 20 focused minutes a day.
The neuroplasticity of the brain responds to frequency, not intensity. Dedicate 5 minutes to analyzing a complex article. Dedicate the next 5 minutes to summarizing the core argument aloud, strictly adhering to the Peel framework. Spend the remaining time isolating one specific hedging phrase, repeating it until the phonetic muscle memory is flawless. A commitment to this daily regimen will fundamentally rewire your fluency within a single quarter.
As we conclude this masterclass, I want to plant a final resonant concept in your mind. We have spent an hour dissecting frameworks, psychology, and tactical delivery. But true eloquence, the kind of communication that alters the trajectory of a career or a relationship, is never about possessing the most expansive vocabulary. And it is certainly never about speaking with rapid-fire speed.
It is profoundly deeper than that. True communication is the act of establishing a shared biological rhythm with another human being. When you speak, you are generating a physical frequency. When you execute these techniques with empathy and precision, the listener's neural pathways physically align with yours. Your voice is not just a metaphor. It is a literal physical instrument constructed of breath, muscle, and focused intent.
The transformative question you must ask yourself is this: how meticulously will you tune that instrument before you step into your next defining conversation?
A masterful perspective. Every carefully chosen word, every strategic concession, and every deliberate moment of silence is a vital component of the bridge you are building to the listener's mind.
The architecture is now yours to build with.
Continue experimenting. Embrace the discomfort of the pause, and remember that every visionary communicator you have ever studied began their journey grappling with the exact same friction you feel today. Your insights possess immense value. They simply require the right transmission to drive them forward. We look forward to continuing this journey of exploration with you next time. Have a powerful and deliberate week.